Let's turn our attention now to cricket. West Indies will know their T20 World Cup fate when they play Ireland in their final first-round match on a Thursday night, Caribbean time. Both teams face early elimination. The Caribbean men are currently third on Group B with 2 points, and a win would see them move atop with 4 points and into the Super 12 draw. They would be joined by the winner of the match between Zimbabwe and Scotland. Joining us now to look ahead to the match is cricket commentator Nikhil Uttamchandani. Welcome, Nikhil.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thanks for having me, and happy to talk about the West Indies and their nerve-wracking chances.
That's such an oxymoron. Right. He's happy to talk about the West Indies and their nerve-wracking chances. So, Nikhil, what are we expecting tonight? What type of West Indies are we expecting tonight?
Well, I think, Maria, you have to expect, and I say this, and I don't know, man, but you have to expect that the West Indies, who, even though they're playing the brand of cricket probably to compare to the teams in that group in that qualifying stage, you have to expect that those with experience, the team that has played 30 T20 internationals between the two World Cups, will come to the party and show that added experience. And show why, they're two-time world champions. I think there were improvements shown in that Zimbabwe game. Obviously, the batting continues to be a massive problem. But I think what we saw from Alzarri Joseph, Jason Holder, and the bowlers, by extension, gives me especially a lot of optimism going into tonight. I think this surface suits the type of bowling attack that we have. And I think fans in the Caribbean should be pretty optimistic that the West Indies can qualify for the Super 12s.
Nikhil, you mentioned, of course, the bowling attack. Alzarri Joseph, Jason Holder have been playing well, but I don't think you can pretty much say the same for Kyle Mayer, who they insist on opening the bowling attack with. Can you make sense of that decision?
Well, I think when you look at why they would have used Kyle Mayers, you look at the last Caribbean Premier League that he's coming off of. He was the second leader we could take in the power play. Clearly, Nicholas Pooran believes that he's someone that can get that prodigious swing early with that new ball and make an impact. And even though he hasn't, really exceeded expectation in terms of international cricket with the ball in hand, I still believe that, given what we've seen across the formats, he can make an impact with the ball. I think it comes down to situational for me. In a game like the first one, where, you're bowling first, you're not sure what to expect, I don't mind throwing him an over because he sort of lengthens the bowling attack as well. It takes some of the onus off of Odean Smith to have to bowl a full 4 of a quarter. However, in a game like the last against Zimbabwe, you've got a small total on the board. I think you've got to go to your strike bowlers, Jason Holder, Akio Hossain, Alzarri Joseph, with that newer ball very early in the innings.
Yeah, do you expect Nicholas Pooran to make any massive changes?
Well, first I'll say, Maria, Nicholas Pooran, he's got to come to the party with the bat in hand himself. That's the biggest change, because you look at his last 11 innings, he hasn't crossed 25, he's only averaged 10. And I think because of the importance of him in terms of his ability to bat against spin, he's the best player of spin in the team, a strike rate of 120. He needs to come to the fore. I believe in him. I think the pressure of captaincy may be getting to him a bit on this big stage. But I think tonight, in the middle overs where the West Indies have really struggled, you look at the two games, 36 for 6 and 57 for 5 between overs 7 and 15. Pooran, for me, has got to come in at 4 or 5, depending on the situation, and really take sort of hold of the game and just look to get them through that period of the game. And I think the West Indies batting lineup then looks so much different in terms of runs on the board. So I want to see him come to the party. In terms of his 11, well, that's going to be an interesting one. I'm very interested to see what they do with Shamar Brooks, because I think him at 5 and 6 is being wasted. They could possibly go to someone like a Raymond Rifa, who gives them an additional bowling option, or a Brandon King if he's, of course, fit.
And, I wanted to touch on that Brandon King inclusion or exclusion, because he was ill. Johnson Charles came in, and, of course, Johnson Charles, stamped his place on the squad with the bat. So does his chance look shaky?
Well, I think if he's fit, I could see him come back in for maybe an Evan Lewis, because I look at it, Evan Lewis, of course, is his first T20 international matches since the last World Cup, and clearly since the Caribbean Premier League, we know the capabilities of this man with all of his experience, but he hasn't looked in that usual rhythm, in that aggressive, explosive nature that we're known to Evan Lewis. I wouldn't mind seeing Brandon King come in at 3, because then it gives you options. You can send King at 3, however, or if Johnson Charles is batting, you have the option of sending Pooran and keeping that left-right combination, complemented then by Robert Powell or Raymond Rifa. So I think based on the form that we've seen King in, highest score in the CPL, and then, of course, had a good year with the bat in international cricket, I would possibly like to see him come back in the 11, probably for Evan Lewis.
As you mentioned, the middle order, right? It's been, of course, you mentioned the concern, the collapses in the middle order the last 2 matches. Is it the structure of how that middle order is put together that has contributed to those collapses, or is it something else?
I think maybe a bit of both. I'll say the structure just on that Shamar Brooks point, but at the end of the day, man, I think it comes down to execution. And these are guys that we've seen all year. To play 29 to 30 matches between World Cups is a luxury that many teams don't have. Zimbabwe played 2 T20 internationals. So we've seen this team have that experience, to build that middle order. We've seen Robin Powell back between 4 and 5 throughout the year. The list goes on. Nicholas Pooran, Jason Holder. I think it comes down to execution. They've got to come up with a plan. In the last game, I saw a greater intent to rotate the strike against a spin, which continues to cause many problems. 9 out of 17 of the West Indies wickets have fallen to spin on a surface that hasn't spun. So they have to find a way, and I think it has to start with the captain. Find a way to navigate that spin, and I think all of a sudden the batting approach looks a lot more proficient and a lot more positive.
Yeah, well, Nikhil, let's move on now. Former Windies wicketkeeper batsman Derek Murray says fans of the men in maroon should brace themselves for a shake-up in the team structure after the World Cup. Murray's comments came on SportsMax, in case you missed the program.
In the earlier days, there was always an avenue for conversation between the board members and the players. And that avenue for conversation was the actual game of cricket, because all the board members were former cricketers and therefore understood the game, understood some of the need. So where you might talk about administration and money and finance and whatnot, at the end of the day, you could go back and talk to your managers, your players, your board members, your coaches, your mentors, because that's what they were, your mentors. And I think that is what is really lacking in cricket today. There have been 2 or 3, at least, significant reports on seeking ways to reform the structure of West Indies cricket over the last 15, 20 years that have fallen on deaf ears, and I think that is where the real problem lies. And come what may at the end of this World Cup, there are going to be conversations again about what changes are needed.
Murray also commented on the team's captaincy.
Closest thing we have to the T20 World Cup is the CPL. The leader of the team that won the CPL, the Talawaz, is that an indication that he or should be the captain or not? But again, you are where you are. You don't want to start with negatives. So, it's really a case of getting the best out of the players. We made, in my opinion, we made a mistake many years ago when in his very early 20s, we put Jason Holder to be the captain of the team. So he was trying to mentor players who were older than him, and he is trying to just find his way in the game. And I think that we are making that mistake over and over again.
Nikhil is still with us. Nikhil, what do you make about Derek Murray's comments?
Yeah, interesting. I definitely agree with him in the sense that, after this World Cup, there will be conversation about administration, about leadership in the West Indies. But when it comes to personnel, I think the West Indies have always got the skill. We've always got the talent. It just comes down to preparation. It comes down to planning. And then, of course, execution. Obviously, we're disadvantaged when you look at compared to the teams like Australia, like India, just way more people, way more infrastructure, better facilities, so many other things against us. But yet still, the West Indies are always there to compete when it comes to a big stage. We've won the World Cup twice, the T20 World Cup, that is. What I will say is, I think there needs to be greater impetus on preparation. We knew exactly that this World Cup was going to be in Australia for a year. We had games to plan. I felt we didn't do enough to really look to dissect those middle overs and look to rotate strike and work on those things. A lot of times we got away in the Caribbean, smaller grounds, high dot ball percentage, and we could just bail ourselves out, even in the CPL, with hitting big 6s and 4s. That, I think, this World Cup would be a wake-up call. I agree with Mr. Murray in the sense that, conversations must be had about leadership, must be had about administration. I think Robin Powell, based on what I saw in the Caribbean Premier League, is definitely a contender to be a future leader of this West Indies squad. He's very animated, I think, just on the field in that leadership position. And he has an ability to get the most out of his team. I was very impressed, and I think he was a massive part as to why the Tallows went all the way, because they were not favourites. They finished 4th and had to go the hard route. But in terms of Nicholas Pooran, not that I don't think he's capable of being captain, but I just wonder if it's sort of taken away from his game. When I look at the numbers, I mentioned the fact that he hasn't gone past 25 in the last 10 games. Clearly, there seems to be something missing from his batting, and I want to see a Nicholas Pooran who is free. He's still a young man, so it'll be interesting to see which way they go. But I think it comes down to more than just 1 or 2 people, whether that be the captain or the coach. It comes down to systemic in terms of the West Indies. What do we do in terms of preparing for big tournaments like this?
Nicola, let me ask you something. One of the challenges I believe with the West Indies cricket T20 team especially is that most of these players only play T20 cricket. So they can hit, but they can't bat. If you look at the best T20 players in the world, they play Test cricket, they play ODI cricket. Virat Kohli, you look at the English team, most of these guys play all 3 formats. Is that a major problem for the West Indies cricket team, in that the team is filled with guys who like to hit, but they don't know how to bat? Could that be a key problem? And probably the West Indies cricket West Indies should start looking at getting these guys to play more 4-day cricket or play more Test cricket to get them to learn how to rotate the strike, because there's a significant reluctance you see from the T20 teams in terms of the inability to push the ball into gaps and take 1s and 2s and then rely only on hitting boundaries.
I think it's a really tough one, and I'll say that because we can say that we want our players to play more Test cricket, we want them to play more one international cricket. 2 things. One, there has to be that amount of Test cricket to play. You look at India, Australia, England, South Africa, they play way more Test cricket than the West Indies. And the second thing is, look, it's very hard to stop these guys when they get this lucrative IPL deal, they get a deal in the Big Bash, to stop them from going. I mean, these are guys that make a significant less amount of money than an Indian cricketer. So it's very easy for the Indian board to say, well, no, you don't get the NOC, you can't go to other leagues. But for the West Indies, we don't have that luxury. So I think it comes with balance. Yes, I think it is important. As you mentioned, you look at the best players in the T20 format, most of them are all format players. I would still believe the Test format is the best cricket format, and it teaches you the fundamentals about batting and about cricket on a whole. So is that taking a toll? Yes, but what I will say more importantly is, what I think is impacting our batters especially a bit more is when they go to IPL, when they go to even the CPL and other franchise leagues, the role is very different to the one that they're playing in the West Indies. Take, for example, Robin Powell. He's being asked to come in at number 4 or 5 for the West Indies and bat maybe from the 10th to 12th over. Whereas for his IPL team for the Delhi Capitals, he's been known to come in the 17th over and just been asked to hit 3 or 4 sixes. Same with Shimron Hetmeyer, who's not in the team. Pooran is an exception. He bats at 4. But I think it's very hard when these guys spend so much time away from the West Indies and the regional setup. They're going to make their money in the franchise leagues. The roles that they play are significantly different to the ones that they're doing for the West Indies, and I think that's costing us.
All right, Nikhil, I want to thank you so much for your input, and as always, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you hopefully soon after we win tonight.
Thank you very much, guys. Let's hope that they get the job done.
You have a lot of optimism there, Maria.
Both Nikhil and I, hello, we're very optimistic. So leave Leighton on his train by himself. Thanks again.
I'm going to bed.
Nikhil Uttam Chantani there.